Today's video continues with the World Religions unit that we've started. And if I plan these out right, this will be the only one that will cover just one religion. The last time we did an introduction, and then we looked at Hinduism. And what I want to do today is sort of review a little bit about Hinduism and then touch on Buddhism. And because those two religions are so far outside the experience of most of my students, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and do those together. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and look at Hinduism just briefly again, and then we're going to dive into Buddhism. The next video after this, the plan is to combine Islam and Judaism. So we'll see how that goes. I don't want to do a 4 or 5 hour video. I'd much rather keep them digestible, but we'll just see how it goes. So today let's focus on, again, the unspoken objective of our World Religions unit, which is respect. In the academic setting, we've got to understand that just because someone has a faith system that is not like our faith system, that does not mean that everything they say about everything, once you find out that they believe differently than you, is wrong. That's thinking like that doesn't have a place in the academic setting. So building on respect, how can we show respect when we talk about Hinduism? Well, what we did is I took several tenets or components of Hinduism and I mashed them into one sentence that in the beginning sounds completely incomprehensible. But the more we break it apart and we look at the specific words and we get definitions, the more we see this is not that difficult. We can do this. So it's the idea in Hinduism for our 8th grade Ancient World History World Religions unit is you follow your dharma to get good karma, to be reincarnated into a higher varna, so we can be reunited with Brahman. The last video we took those apart, understanding that essentially it means that we follow our list of responsibilities to get good consequences so that our soul can be born into the infant body of a human who is in a slightly higher varna or jati, to eventually work our way up after thousands of lifetimes to be reunited with the one universal spirit. There's a lot. If we were in class, there'd be hands going up and people looking at me like, what? Essentially, that is enough for us to exercise respect. If we're in a setting in a classroom where a student is talking about reincarnation, or reincarnation comes up in the discussion and someone looks like they know what they're talking about or they're affirming it, we need to understand that reincarnation is an aspect of some religions like Hinduism. And so we need to show a little respect for that. We need to just know that that's what they believe and that this is a part of their faith system. Also, overall, comprehensively, the entire religion of Hinduism is very, very much works-based. And so they are constantly working, following their dharma, meeting these responsibilities, the prayers, the sacrifices. And the people who are on the higher parts of the Indian caste system are thought of as better than the people below them because they have spent hundreds of lifetimes getting where they are. This is kind of alien for Americans, but it's something that we need to understand in the ancient world. So today we're going to look at the next religion in our world history unit, which is Buddhism. Now, a lot of students have a hard time when you begin with Hinduism because in history, some people like the idea of locking things down. Give me something concrete. Where did Hinduism start? I don't know. It's extremely old. It is impossible because it is prehistoric. It's impossible to lock down the place that it started. Okay, who started it? Who is the originator? Who's the main person? Well, there isn't one. There isn't one person. There's not like a Bob Hindu and everything is named after him. Because again, it's prehistoric. It's difficult. Some students like fact. Well, Buddhism may be a little more down your alley. We start off with the date, 563 BC. In 563 BC, the person who will become known as the Buddha, the teacher who was the Buddha, is born. And when he is born, his name is Siddhartha Gautama. So we have a name, Siddhartha Gautama. We have a time, 563 BC. We can lock it down. We also have a place, modern-day Nepal. Nepal is north of the subcontinent of India, just right on the Himalaya Mountains. Some of it's jungle, but some of it's right on the Himalaya Mountains. In 563 BC, a Hindu prince is born. And that's important. And his name is Siddhartha Gautama. Now, as he grows up, he has it made. He has everything. In class, what I do is I describe Siddhartha Gautama as the bubble boy, because he had everything perfect. His life was great. He never wanted for food. He never wanted for any luxuries. He was a prince. Now, he was minor noble, but still, all of his needs were met. When he came of age, he got married. He started a family, and he thought everything in his little kingdom was perfect. And so one day, as a young man, he told his wife and his young son, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go see the kingdom. And he saw something that he couldn't understand. And what he saw was suffering. He saw poverty. He saw beggars. He saw sickness. He saw disease. He saw the elderly who were homeless. And he had a supercalifragilistic existential crisis. He melted down. He didn't understand how there could be so much suffering in his kingdom. He thought that everybody's life was just like his. And when he actually got outside of the palace and saw things, he just had a meltdown. And he couldn't make sense using the teachings of Hinduism to his satisfaction of what he saw. And so he decided that he was going to go and find an answer. And he put on a yellow robe, and he told his family goodbye, and he started walking. Now, a good question would be, well, where was he going? He didn't know. He had no idea. He took a little bit for the trip, but eventually he almost starved to death. And then sitting under a tree, according to the teachings of Buddhism, he had this amazing flash of understanding. And that is when he became the Buddha, the teacher known as the Buddha. And the Buddha, from that point on, from the moment that he had his revelation, began to teach about the main thing that didn't make sense to him following Hinduism or anything else in that area of the world at the time. And that was suffering. So Siddhartha Gautama, now the Buddha, distilled what he understood into two groups of teachings. The first one is the Four Noble Truths, and the second one is the Eightfold Path. Now, these are on page 261 in your state-provided textbook, and I strongly encourage, if we were in class, we'd be getting these as test grades from memory. But I strongly encourage you to read these, to look over these. So you have the Four Noble Truths, and you have the Eightfold Path. Okay. When you do look at them, because I hope that you do, when you do, you're going to realize, hey, Mr. Morton, they're not four noble truths. There's three noble truths, and there's a commercial for the Eightfold Path. Because the last one is know and follow the Eightfold Path. And there are not eight noble truths. There's seven noble truths in a commercial for the they're not Eightfold Path. There's Sevenfold Path in a commercial for the Four Noble Truths. Because the first of the Eightfold Path is know and learn the Four Noble Truths. So really, you've only got 3 and 7 to work with. Let's talk about the Four Noble Truths. The first of the Four Noble Truths, pretty much every 8th grade student that's going to view these videos already knows. Life is full of suffering. Now, as difficult as it is for us to believe, Siddhartha Gautama did not know that. This was news to him, and he felt like it needed to be broadcasted. So the first of the Noble Truths is that life is full of suffering. Then he moves into diagnosing, the diagnostic phase. Why? Why is there suffering? Why does there have to be suffering? Some of the connective tissue between Hinduism and Buddhism is they both teach that the physical world is not as important as the spiritual world. And so the problem, according to Siddhartha Gautama, is that people were putting the emphasis on the wrong world. They were focusing on the physical world instead of the spiritual world. And so the second of the noble truths, after life is full of suffering, is the diagnostic. People suffer because they want worldly things and they want to satisfy themselves. That's where suffering came from. Now, my students can, and everyone who learns about Buddhism, you can hear that, you can dissect that, you can have a philosophical or a religious discussion about it, but this is what he came to, and this is how his teachings develop. Life is full of suffering, and the reason that people suffer is because they want worldly or physical things, and they want to satisfy themselves. Then the third one, following that train of thought, is the way to give up suffering is to give up worldly things. Just stop wanting things, which to anyone, it doesn't matter what part of the world you live in, that's a tough sell right there. That's difficult. You know, it's sort of like the joke, hey doc, my arm hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. Does that really fix it? You suffer because you want things. Well, what can I do? Stop wanting things. That's why the fourth noble truth is, in order to stop desiring worldly things, you have to know and follow the Eightfold Path. And so that's the second set of teachings, again on page 261 in the textbook. The Eightfold Path does get a little bit more in depth. It deals with some things that are a little bit, if we were in class, it'd be a little easier. It deals with some things that are a little easier to say than it is to do. One of them is to train your mind to keep your senses in balance. What does that look like? What does that mean? A lot of it, the eighth one, is about meditation, to understand the world around you better. Some of them, however, are very, very practical. Give up things. Give up worldly goods. Seek to do good. Do rewarding work, whatever job you get as an adult. I hope that you find some type of reward in your work. I know for teaching, and for me, teaching is very rewarding for me. So there is something to be said for doing rewarding work. Don't commit evil acts, stealing and killing. Don't lie about people. Speak only the truth. Don't Southerners might say backbiting. The Eightfold Path is a collection of steps, ideas, and practices that Siddhartha Gautama, now the Buddha, truly believed would take a person further and further away from suffering by taking them further and further away from desiring worldly material things. It's interesting. It's a very, very interesting worldview. It's a very, very interesting world religion. When it was on the scene in the late the late 500s BC, early 600s BC, there were a lot of people who were practicing Hindus who wanted a more simple and a more spiritual religion, because to some people, Hinduism in the late 500s BC it felt like it was really nothing more than just a do this and do that and do this, and there were people who wanted something more spiritual. And Siddhartha Gautama was one of the people. There were several others, but Siddhartha Gautama, now the Buddha, is one of the people who offered one of those paths. Now let's talk about how did Buddhists and Hindus get along. Well, Buddhists were pretty good with everybody, but Hindus, not all people who followed Hinduism were okay with Buddhism. And the reason is because of what the Buddha taught the Eightfold Path was capable The Buddha taught that if you followed the Eightfold Path, you were able to reach a state of nirvana. That is where the grunge band of the 90s got its name. Nirvana. It is not a place, it is a state of mind, a peace around you. And it comes from letting go more and more of the desire of earthly things, and thereby, according to Buddhism, getting further away from suffering. The problem is, for Hindus, that the Buddha taught that if you followed the Eightfold Path, you did not have to live thousands and thousands of lifetimes being reincarnated over and over and following your Dharma and following your Dharma and following your Dharma. According to the teachings of the Buddha, if you followed the Eightfold Path and achieved nirvana, you could then be reunited with Brahman. Now, the Buddha did believe in reincarnation. He just said that it wasn't necessary. This was really, really good news for the people who were on the lowest castes in the Indian social caste system, the pariah and even the Sudra. And of course, because the social caste system is in a pyramid shape, that means there are fewer at the top and more at the bottom. There's a large number of people who are gravitating toward this idea. Now, the Hindus who are in the upper castes, they don't like this at all. And the reason is because in their religion, they have gone through hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes, and now somebody's just going to come along and say you just do these things and you can jump to the head of the line. No. So there's going to be a little friction between Hindus and Buddhists from the Hindu side, but not from the Buddhism side. Now, in Hinduism, just to sort of wrap things up, in Hinduism, there are no branches. There's no groups or denominations or anything like that. In Buddhism, we're going to see our first groups. There were a group of people, and this is on page 262 in your state-provided textbook for the spellings of these. There were a group of people who believed that the Buddha was just a teacher. He is not some divine emanation of Brahman like Vishnu and Shiva and things like that. He's just a teacher. That group of Buddhists became known as the Theravada Buddhists. Theravada, teacher. So that group of Buddhists believed that the Buddha was just a teacher. He was awesome, he got some really good information, just a teacher. There's another group that's mentioned on page 262 in the textbook, and they are the Mahayana. The Mahayana Buddhists believe that the Buddha was actually a god, like the way Hindus understand God. So these emanations are avatars of Brahman. And they also believe, Buddhists believe, that the Eightfold Path, yes, is too hard, it's too much. For human beings, that's too difficult. So the Mahayana Buddhists believe that you worship the Buddha as a god until you die. And then when you die, you go to the Buddhist idea of heaven. It's a place where humans are capable of following the Eightfold Path, and then they can be reunited with Brahman. So Buddhism is it's related to Hinduism. That's why we started with it, with following your Dharma to get good karma to reincarnate into a higher Varna, so you can be reunited with Brahman. Buddhism is related to that. However, because Siddhartha Gautama was fascinated and appalled with this suffering that he saw, what Buddhism focuses on is achieving this state of mind where you have let go of worldly things, and by doing this, according to Buddhism, you've limited suffering as much as possible. You have the Four Noble Truths, which is really the Three Noble Truths in a commercial for the Eightfold Path. And in the Four Noble Truths, you've got that declaration that life is full of suffering, the diagnosis that people suffer because they want worldly things and want to satisfy themselves, and then the remedy, the way that you stop suffering is you stop wanting things. Well, how do you do that? Then you have the Eightfold Path, which is really the Sevenfold Path in a commercial for the Four Noble Truths. The first of the Eightfold Path, know and learn the Four Noble Truths. And then from there, you see practical steps that are ranging from the really nebulous, use your mind to control your senses, to the very, very practical. Don't lie. Don't talk bad about people. Do rewarding work. Try to detach from worldly things. If you follow the Eightfold Path, then Buddhists believe that you can reach a place where you can be reunited with Brahman and you don't have to be reincarnated over and over. A little bit of friction between the Hindus, especially in the upper castes, and the Buddhists, and we'll try to talk a little bit more about that later. But that is your introduction to Buddhism. Make sure you watch this video a couple of times if you need to before you attempt the assessment.